Wow. You're now expecting something I'm not sure I can deliver. Thank you, Michael. The beauty of being a teacher, I've discovered over the last couple of years as I've had the privilege to teach at BGI and at UW and a few other places, is it's just inspiring to watch what your students do and to have a chance to touch lives, to spur people to find their purpose, find their potential, and unleash that on the world is really an incredible privilege. So thank you for that. So I gotta be honest with you, I have been sweating buckets over this talk, and there's a reason for it. I am in a period of profound change and shift in my life, and even my thoughts on purpose are changing dramatically. So as I've been trying to hone in on one nugget that I can share with you, the thing that I've come to is a simple question. And if I can figure out how to operate this, it is the power of questions. Every one of you in this room is working on change. In your own lives, in your organizations, in your communities, in our world. And I'll bet you on your journeys in that process, you have been moved by the power of the question. I've certainly found this in my own life. Questions have spurred a shift, a transformation, multiple times in my journey. I'm going to share a few of those moments with you. But the reason I chose to focus on questions in a conversation about purpose is because I really think questions are, if there is a magic bullet, the only magic bullet I know. They spur us on a journey. If we're willing to ask ourselves the questions that are occurring to us, in the words in which they're occurring to us, in the way in which they're occurring to us, if we have the courage to listen to those questions and to follow them where they take us with curiosity, with an open mind, a sense of exploration, then they are the things that will lead us individually, organizationally, and as a community to real transformation and change in the world. So two just quick examples before I go into my main slides to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. Questions have been transformative throughout our history as a species. So Isaac Newton, in a story that some say is apocryphal, but my research tells me actually really happened, one day went out after lunch and sat under an apple tree. And as you may know, supposedly an apple fell on his head. Now this prompted him to ask the question, why do apples always fall perpendicular to the ground? Pretty basic question, but it led him to a series of observations and experiments that helped him evolve his theory of gravity, and that has spurred our understanding of science and technology and really helped us move forward as a species. So questions have spurred advances in science on the one hand, and on the other hand, they've spurred advances in spirituality. Siddhartha, the man who would become the Buddha, the enlightened one, he embarked on his quest because of a question. When he first saw suffering and illness and death, he was prompted to ask, what is suffering? How do we move beyond suffering? And that led, as you know, to his discoveries of meditation, enlightenment, and techniques that we can use to further our own thinking as beings. So questions are incredibly powerful things. And they're powerful things in a world in which we're facing enormous problems. These are the kinds of things that we see in the headlines every day. In fact, at the moment in Davos, the World Economic Forum is meeting. It's got leaders from business, society, government, you name it. And they recently put out a report on some of the top global challenges that we're facing. And the report was developed based on a series of interviews and conversations and surveys from global leaders from across business and society. But what's striking to me about the prioritized list that they put out is, yes, they mention these kinds of problems, but the language that they're using, the things that they talk about are predominantly economic and financial. Climate is on there, the environment is on there, but it's number 6 or 7 on this list. People are on there. I think number 4 and 5 relate to structural unemployment, which I know is a huge problem in the world. But the way that we're talking about people on the planet are part of the problem. And if we ask smart questions, we can use the clues that we're being given to find out what are the true problems, how might we move beyond them. So let me use a couple of stories from my own life to illustrate what I'm talking about. This is a quote many of you know. This is actually apocryphal. It's a little bit taken out of context, and it's been attributed to Einstein, and I won't go into the history of it, but it is worth reading about. But it's a phenomenal quote. Given the magnitude of the problems that we're facing in the world today, we have to be able to shift our thinking, to move beyond the level of thinking we were at when we helped contribute to and cause these problems. But have you ever wondered, how do you change your thinking? How do you shift the way in which you're thinking when you're barely even conscious of the methods that you're using, of how you think? I've tried to do this in my work in international development. I had the privilege a couple of years ago of working at the Gates Foundation and working on issues of water and sanitation. And I was able to bring a new perspective to some of the work, in particular to help people look at the systems that they were working in. And rather than just focusing on developing one technology and pushing it out to people, to start to think about, well, what does the whole system look like? How might we change the system so it is more inclusive and effective? But in that work, a curious thing happened. I started to realize I wasn't learning anymore. And I wasn't very happy. I'm never really very happy when I'm not learning and changing in some way. And this led me to think about, well, hang on a second. In all of my work, I'm trying to get others to change their thinking. But how do I shift my own thinking? Is there something in my thinking that is limiting me from moving forward, from being more effective in the world, from doing more in the world? So a question, again, occurred that spurred a change, a shift in thinking, an openness to some newness in me. And that was an incredibly powerful thing. It's what led me to discover that I have a passion and excitement for teaching, which I will be doing more and more of in the world. Earlier in my career, when I first started working, actually, I worked in London in banking and finance. Not a lot of people know this about me, but I was an investment banker for a couple of years. And I gotta tell you, it was one of the most incredible experiences I have ever had. I worked with some of the smartest people I had ever met in this particular investment bank that I was working in London. People that were passionate, that were dedicated. I learned a lot. I was inspired. But again, a funny thing happened. When I got to the point where I felt that I wasn't learning, I started to ask deeper questions. What am I doing here? I'm not motivated by making money for other people. That doesn't matter to me. I don't even care about making money for myself. So why am I involved in this organization? And as I sat with that question, I found myself in a very interesting client conversation one day. And I'm not going to go into the specifics of the client, but what I realized was I didn't have the knowledge to provide value to this client in the way that they were asking us to provide value. Now, I wish I could tell you that I was humble enough to recognize that. I wasn't. I was scared. I didn't want to be found out. And what I knew was not just that I didn't know enough to be able to provide value, I knew that I wasn't motivated enough to figure it out because I wasn't passionate about or interested in the thing that the client was really doing. So I took the opportunity when it surfaced to talk to a colleague of mine, the person that was actually the client lead, and I told him about this and I said, look, we really need to bring in somebody with more experience. And I'll happily work with them, learn with them, but that way I'm going to have some confidence that we're really going to give the client what they're asking for and provide real value. Curiously, my colleague didn't seem to get what I was talking about. And instead, he made some comment about them and us. Now, I'm a Sri Lankan Brit, so we're a pretty reserved bunch of people when it comes to emotions. And in fact, I spent 5 years at boarding school as a young child, so you can imagine how emotionally locked up I was at this particular point in time. But what was fascinating to me is I can't remember the specifics of our conversation because the only phrase that is stuck in my mind is them and us. And the reason is I had a visceral reaction to that phrase. The question that shot through my mind and shot through my body was, who do you think you are? How is it that you see yourself as separate? And then this was a question that was going through my mind to my colleague. What I realized is that he felt we were different, we were special, we were these cool, hip investment bankers on our way to success, on our way to wealth. We were different, we were separate from our client. We were better somehow, and that did not sit well with me. If anything, I actually identified with them. And I knew in that moment that I had to get out. I had to leave investment banking. That was the trigger. That was the question that prompted me to leave, to follow my heart, to find my passion, to switch into working in issues of global health and development. But what's always stayed with me since that moment is this idea of us and them. It's an incredibly powerful idea. It's very pervasive through our society, so much so most people don't actually see and understand the extent to which we see ourselves as separate from each other. Not only do we see ourselves as separate from each other as people, but we also see ourselves as separate from the planet, separate from the environment. We see our economic system as separate to our environmental system, to our social systems. And this is a fundamental problem, because until we shift, until we challenge that assumption and can see ourselves not just as interconnected, but as Carol Sanford mentioned, as nested, as part of a greater whole, we're not going to be asking the kinds of questions that truly unleash innovation and transformation in ourselves and particularly in our businesses. Let me make that tangible for you. And I could give you some examples from my own life, but actually the most powerful example I've come across to date is actually, again, another Carol Sanford example. In her book, and it's well worth reading, The Responsible Business, she talks about her work with seventh generation and Jeffrey Hollander. Many of you know Jeffrey and the seventh generation team. It's an incredibly values-driven company, right? They care about the environment, they care about social justice and equity. They were trying to create products and work in a way that didn't have a negative impact on the world. But Carol helped them start asking deeper questions, more fundamental questions that challenged their sense of separation from their social systems and the environment. In particular, she asked them, how might they create products and work in a way that they don't just deliver value to their clients, but they actually improve the social and environmental systems in which they're working? To make that very tangible, and for those of you that don't know seventh generation, they're a company that produce things like laundry detergent, dishwashing powder, and so forth. But think about this. What happens when you ask yourself, how do you create a washing up product, a laundry detergent, that doesn't just do the job that you want it to do with your dishes or your clothes, but actually improves the state of the ecosystem, that cleans water, that revitalizes the ecosystem, that helps regenerate the world and the systems that we're living in? Do you get a sense of how powerful that question is? How it opens up your thinking to new ways of innovating, of building products, of building businesses? These are the kinds of questions I believe we need to be asking in the world today if we're going to solve the kinds of problems that we're facing. So it is a massive world with a lot of problems. Paul talked very eloquently about the extent of the problems in America. I work mostly internationally, and I can tell you that the problems are pretty profound in many of the countries that I work in. But I'm actually incredibly optimistic at the moment, and I'm optimistic for two main reasons. One is the power of technology. Two is the power of people. Let me share a little bit more about those two things. On the technological side, advances in science are shifting our understanding of ourselves, of our being. We are starting to see data come through that helps us understand the degree to which we're connected. And I don't just mean connected by technology and communications infrastructure. There's some experimentation that's been done that shows that objects that we think of as inanimate actually have a reaction to our emotions when we project a happy or a negative emotion on those objects. My guess is, and I think you can probably sense this, we also react quite significantly to the environments and the contexts we put ourselves into. Think about the last time you went on vacation. somewhere warm and sunny perhaps, kicking off your shoes, walking in the sand. You know what that feels like. It feels wonderful, doesn't it? You can feel your body relaxing, your mind opening, your whole being shifting. What happens when you dive into the warm water and play? Again, there's a shift. Even here in Seattle, a city of gardeners, I am so not a gardener, by the way, but I understand this to be true from all the gardening friends I have. What happens when you're out in the garden, when you put your hands into the warm soil, maybe cold soil at the moment, the cold, wet soil, and you look and watch things grow? It's an incredibly powerful feeling. We are so connected to the environment and to each other in ways we're just beginning to understand. And technology is furthering that understanding through enabling a physical communication network, a network that mirrors not just our neural nets, but the invisible connections that when we stop and pause and listen, we start to wake up to. Technology is also powering people in phenomenal ways. It's radically changing our educational systems, as many of you know. But I'm seeing this not just in the US, I'm seeing this in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. People are waking up to their potential because of the access to information that they have. Many of you have heard of the boy who harnessed the wind, William, a young boy in rural Malawi who figured out on his own how to build a windmill and bring electricity for the first time to his village. I know people in Ghana and Kenya doing similar kinds of things. There was a story circulating just a couple of months ago about some girls who had figured out how to turn urine, something we've historically looked at as waste, into energy. There was another story of a really young boy who, observing the pattern of leaves on a plant, realized he could rearrange solar panels in a way to optimize the amount of electricity that was being generated from the sun. These are powerful stories. I'm even seeing this in India, kids teaching themselves how to read, how to learn English, doing problems that we used to think were university-level science problems. Human potential is a phenomenal thing. We all have it. Our connectedness and technology are helping us unleash that. Oops. So what, again, does this have to do with questions, with problems that we're facing in the world today, with each one of us? I think it has a lot to do with questions, with purpose. But instead of asking ourselves what the world needs and what our purpose is, if we can shift our thinking to ask ourselves what makes us come alive, then I think we're beginning something that's incredibly powerful, a human capital revolution, a purpose revolution, a potential revolution. So let me leave you with one of my favorite quotes. It's by Howard Thurman. He's an African-American pastor who was a close advisor to Martin Luther King, and what he said was this: ask not what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and go do it. For what the world needs is people who have come alive. Thank you.